to attempt to tackle a topic that's a little bit controversial and difficult, but it's very relevant in what I've been reading lately, which has been Nietzsche and then the rise and fall of the Third Reich. And I also just think is an, an important topic to tackle, although uncomfortable, because whatever the answer is, right, whatever to the extent there is a truth about it, I think it's important to uncover it. And I have a hypothesis, I have a view, biased as it might be by all the things that bias us. But if I hope that that view is true, it's as I've said before, we can't just will things into existence. We can't just make pretend things are true because we want them to be true. We have to have the courage and the mental toughness and the humility and the logic and all the things to actually explore it and try and get as close to the objective truth as we can. So with that caveat, the topic I want to talk about is kind of the way of the world, if you will, human nature, the way we're meant to function as a race and as a human race and as a society, right? And I think in 2020, much of the world and much of us, particularly in the US, believe in the democratic values of freedom and liberty and natural human rights and equality that we've grown up with for a long time. And again, I'll try and be objective in this and call out where I think there is true, hard logic and truth, and instances where it's it feels that way, but it's probably more based on just the way and the culture in which we were raised, and try and be objective in it. But so we have these values, and as I think about that, I can acknowledge that again, much of that has been ingrained in me from before I was born, frankly, right? It's just the history of the country and what we believe and where much of the world has moved to. But even when you try and step back and look at it from different perspectives and be objective, there's a lot that feels right about it. It feels fair. It feels just. It feels that we are all humans and we should all, treat each other the way we want to be treated, and everybody should be given a fair shot and be treated equally and fairly, and everybody's voice should have a say. That feels like the right approach to it. Now, the counter to that is that, there's an argument that some would make that that's not actually right. It feels right. It's idealistic. There's lots of pros to it, but it's not actually the natural order of things. The natural order of things is more in line with what you would see in nature, which you would see from animals, which we are, one of, which is the survival of the fittest, and the strongest get to dictate terms. And there are certain people that are better, stronger, more equipped to lead and make decisions and chart the path in which things work and just be in control, be in a dominant position. And that is more the true natural order of things. And we have almost tried to manufacture an evolution beyond that, for various reasons, as stated before. But much like I was saying, right, because we want it to be true, because it feels like it should be true, because it feels nice and right and moral, doesn't mean that it is. And that's kind of the heart of the topic and the struggle. And I say it, as I said, because Nietzsche writes very much about this, and he believes in a will to power, which is more in line with the latter, that there is a natural order to the world, and then the more dominant should lead. Obviously, the Third Reich and Hitler had that view. And again, my reaction to it, as I would assume many people is that's wrong. That's not the way it should be. That's inhumane. That's evil. That's bad. But we have to make sure we understand why it's wrong, why it's evil, why it's bad. Because if it's true that it is all those things, you want to understand how to protect against it. But B, if there are nuggets of truth to it, we need to understand that. Because if they're true, we need to understand what that is, to the extent we could ever know they're true. And who's to say we ever could? So as I look at that and try and understand it, I guess I'll start in this video, and I'll do a few of these, by why I feel compelled to believe that is not true. That the democratic values of freedom, liberty, equality, that those are the right things for us. The first one I would point to is, the argument that look at animals, look at the way animals function, right? That's the way we're meant to function. There's a couple issues with that, and I've talked about some of these before. One, I don't think, and I'm not an expert on this, but I don't think there are any animals in the world that hurt, murder, rape, whatever horrible thing you want to call it, other animals in their species or what have you, or even outside, just for the sake of it, just for sadistic or self-pleasuring reasons, right? There's a need to procreate, there's a need to protect and defend, there's a need to eat, right? So there's a lot of horrific things that happen in nature. There is murdering, there is probably rape to some extent, but to the extent we can understand it, and in my limited view of it, all of that is towards a purpose that's very natural, right? Again, procreation or defense or to eat and survive, etc. Humans would be arguably the only animal species that does those things at times just for their own self-pleasure, just for their own purpose. And that seems not to be natural to me. So if you're going to make the animal argument, I think there's some inconsistencies in it. And then we could talk about this in another video. You could probably debate that a little bit, that some of those horrific things humans do, is there a purpose behind it? Is there, maybe we don't like it, but there is some purpose. But I'll leave it at that for now. So that's kind of point one on the animal argument. The other piece is the other obvious one is evolution, right? The way we've evolved is our minds, our brains, our capacity to think. So the idea that we need to stay stagnant and think and act just like other animals would, again, it could be true, but it doesn't seem like a given that that's the proof point that shows that's the way the world should function or humans should function. It seems entirely possible and likely and seems to be evidence of it that we have evolved into a better place where we don't need to function in that base rudimentary way. We can be more sophisticated, we can understand people better, and we could strive to be better, to where there doesn't have to be masters and slaves or dominants and submissives or people that are just sacrificial to those in power or in charge. It seems like we could and should expect better than that, and that evolution would explain that. It doesn't prove it, but it certainly makes for a good argument for it and something to consider. So I think those 2 points kind of get to that more base animalistic view of it. And then I guess the last piece I would say is, in Nietzsche, as an example, there's this view that there are dominant people, stronger men, as he would call them, and they should be in a position of power because that's how nature set them up to be. They are more dominant. And I get that logic. But my final point would be, if they are overcome, right? If they are defeated, for lack of a better word, by the masses even. If let's make up the numbers. If 10% of the population are these stronger men that Nietzsche would call them, but 90% are not. But those 90% come together and feel like, hey, that's not what we want. We don't want 10% of the population dictating what we do and, dominating us in any way. So we're not going to allow that. It seems like many, Nietzsche included, would say, well, no, that's not right. That's not the way it should be. You should be submissive and they should be in charge. Well, says who, right? If the idea here is that we're playing by, we're trying to let it be natural and let it play out naturally, well, then that's naturally what happened. Those 90% of people stood up and said, no, that's not how we're going to do it. And almost by your own logic, Nietzsche or whoever it may be, you need to accept that. I understand that you want it to be that there are dominant forces and there are stronger men and they should win out. But if they don't, well, then that's natural. They didn't win. It almost ties back to the principle of logic that I talk about as kind of a universal principle. If they were meant to win, if the stronger, dominant men were meant to win, then that's what it would be. But it's not, and that tells you something. So I'll leave it there for now, and I think it's something I want to explore further, but just some initial thoughts on this topic that I think are worth really diving into.